Welcome to Bristol Bay Native Corporation's podcast series, Mug Up with BBNC. Mug Up is a term commonly used in the Bristol Bay region, specifically in the fishing community. It refers to getting together with friends and family for a casual gathering over a warm cup of coffee or tea. It's all about sharing stories, experiences, and connecting with one another. In this podcast, hosted by BBNC's communications team, you'll hear from BBNC employees, community leaders, and passionate individuals who are engaged in BBNC's mission of enriching our Native way of life. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mug Up with BBNC. My name is Anise, and with me is Kayla. And today we are sitting down with two very special guests. We have Kameron Perez-Verdia, who is the president and CEO of the Alaska Humanities Forum, and Emily Brockman, the acting director of programs from the Bristol Bay Foundation. Welcome. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
My name is Kameron Perez-Verdia. I serve as the president and CEO of the Alaska Humanities Forum. Let's see, I was born and raised in Alaska. I grew up in the village of Utqiagvik, formerly known as Barrow. And I am a dad. I have two teenage daughters. We just talked about that. And my wife works here in town. She's originally from Mexico City, and she's a nurse practitioner here in town. And I've been at the Alaska Humanities Forum for around 8 years now. And it's amazing to say that because I have never been in a job that long. But as I just think about my background and thinking about growing up in Barrow and how that shaped me. Other thing that's interesting to know about me is my indigenous heritage is actually Oglala Lakota from South Dakota. So people are often confused because of my last name and because I'm from Barrow. But growing up in Barrow and really helped to shape, I think, a lot of who I am as a person growing up in an indigenous community and in a whaling community. And I think about that a lot in terms of my own heritage and my wife's heritage and our family and how that shapes my view of my work and how important it is, especially during Native Heritage Month, Alaska Native and American Indian Heritage Month, and how that shapes not only my view of the world and my view of the work, but shapes the organization's role in telling those stories and being a part of those communities. So it's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Emily, tough act to follow.
I know. It's also so funny because my first real job was at the forum. And so to think about Kameron not being there is just a strange flavor. It doesn't exist in my world.
Yeah.
But hello, huinga at chamaruluviluk, churur miungunga dol daram anchorage. So hello, my name is Emily Brockman. I am originally from Dillingham. My mom is Serena Tennyson of Togiak. My dad is Carson Ken Brockman of Carson, Iowa. My grandparents are the late Henry Bavila of Aleknagik and the late Mary Bavila of Togiak. I really appreciated Kameron's introduction because I think it also helps to set the tone for providing context for who I am. I said I'm from Dillingham, and that is true, but I moved to Seward when I was about 11, and it was that transition from off the road system to on the road system that really changed the trajectory of my life path, in that being exposed to high teacher turnover, high food prices, like all of the things in rural Alaska, and then coming to a community like Seward where there was just so many like dance programs and there was teacher retention, and even as like a very young person, I was like, why is this? Why are things the way that they are? Yeah. And that really kicked off my passion for education and is the reason why I'm here today.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Yeah, that really speaks to me as well. I think about why I see the world the way I see the world, and how much of where we grow up and the community that we grow up in and how that shapes us. And and I know that's what we're going to talk about today in a lot of ways, but But growing up in a small rural Alaska Native village, especially one that's so rich in culture, and speaking Inupiaq and being a part of pulling in whales and eating traditional foods and learning dance, and that as being a core part of your life as a child, really I think helps to shape your view of the world. So it was a pretty awesome opportunity to grow up in that community for sure.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the organizations you're a part of, the Bristol Bay Foundation and the Alaska Humanities Forum. Share a little bit about how they tie to cultural enrichment. This month is Alaska Native Heritage Month and also Native American and Alaska Native Heritage Month. And so how do your guys' organizations fit in there?
Mm-hmm. I have to have a small little admission, which is that there's a small part of me that resents the word culture working in a Native organization, and you're both like nodding along. And I think it's because culture is just sort of indicating that it's not a part of the norm. When everyone here, in the office, like we joke that the diversity hires are for non-shareholders and they're particularly like people who are not women. And so I think that for the Bristol Bay Foundation, I mean, that's what the work that we do serves shareholders and their descendants. And first and foremost, I mean, it was a powerhouse scholarship organization. And so they were providing that sort of financial support to the region and its students. And they've done a really incredible job of adapting it and expanding it to provide other financial supports through the Ikayachna, which is like the mental health emergency aid fund that students have, and then also providing like mental health supports through access to counseling and all of those things. But as it relates to the Bristol Bay Foundation, we're really starting to break into this new space of culture and heritage. And it feels a little bit strange to say that as a Native organization, but really like that's where our history is steeped in is a scholarship foundation. And so it really wasn't until the Teaching and Learning Collaborative that we started to take up space, throwing our elbows around a little bit, learning what that feels like to break into this type of programming. And it feels really good. It's the growth, I think there are growing pains, but I think we're starting to figure some stuff out. And all of that had to do with a culture and wellness check that folks did through surveying and really talking to community members and elders and kids. And the resounding response was that people want more language, they want more dance, they want more of these cultural activities that historically we haven't had a lot of access to through bigger institutions.
And you certainly are doing that. It's been really exciting to watch. It's been exciting to watch Alicia move into that position of leadership, and for her to bring on people like you and others to really build that organization. It's been really exciting to see. It's hard to think about that. So the Alaska Humanities Forum has a pretty long history, and I know we don't have too much time, but I think going back to the National Endowment for the Humanities that was formed in the 60s, and then the development of councils. And so each state and territory has a council, has a humanities council. Those were created because of the distance between academia and research and actual communities. And so when these councils were created, it was about really connecting to actual people that live in actual communities, And so the Alaska Humanities Forum was formed in the early 70s, and different from many other states, it was formed in a way that was really about bringing the community together to talk about and to work on the most important issues of our day, the things that community members and our state felt were so important. And so over the course of more than 50 years now, the organization's been involved in a lot of really important conversations in this state. And so at its core, we're really about two things, strengthening community and inspiring understanding. And what we know is that in order to strengthen community, we have to bring people together. And we have to create spaces for people to learn about themselves, their own culture, their own values, their own beliefs, but then give them the opportunity to connect with others, and often others that are different from them. And so much of our work is about creating these spaces for young people, for adults, for aspiring leaders, for culture bearers, for all kinds of folks to come together and to do that work, to connect with themselves and with others, and to build community. And often it's through culture. It's through stories. It's through those things that are most important to all of us. And so our organization has lots of different programs, and we can dive into some of them today. But all of them are really centered in that idea of strengthening community, and through partnerships like the Bristol Bay Foundation, because we can't do our work by ourselves. We're often, never actually, the experts in the room. We're often the organization that creates the space, creates the partnerships, creates the conditions for really important work to be done, really important conversations to be had. So we need organizations and partnerships to really do our work. So that's probably the easiest way to explain who we are and what we do, and it's a lot of fun because we get to be in lots of different rooms, lots of different spaces, lots of different communities to be doing that work.
You kind of touched on it, Kameron, how the Humanities Forum has these different programs, and it really is to bring people from all different walks of life, cultures, ethnicities, and bringing them all together. Can you give us some examples of some of the programs that do that?
Sure. And one of the things it's a funny thing, but the word humanities is not a word that at least I was that connected with or familiar with, and often when we think of the word humanities, we think of those of us that went to college and maybe took a humanities course, and we think of it from a very academic perspective. But I just wanted to connect that word to what you're saying, is that when we think of the humanities, when we think of the public humanities, we think of stories of human experience, the stories of us, right? The stories of our grandparents, the stories of our communities. Those stories are what the humanities are. And they're told in many different ways. They're told through songs, they're told through the oral traditions, they're told in lots of different ways. But those stories are really the thing that we use to connect community. And they teach us about our past, they teach us about the decisions that were made that led to us being where we are today, and they hopefully help to shape the decisions that we're going to make in the future. But yeah, lots of programs. Well, the one program that we obviously should talk about is the partnership between the Alaska Humanities Forum and Bristol Bay Foundation. And that program, it's called C3, and it stands for Creating Cultural Competence. And that program started a long time ago, more than 20 years ago. And it came out of this concern around teacher turnover. And for those of us who grew up in rural Alaska, we know that teachers often come from outside of Alaska, and they don't often stay very long. And so it was at first an effort to connect new teachers to the community, to connect new teachers to culture and language, to elders and to youth, and to create an opportunity for them to really be connected to community, but also an opportunity for them to connect to themselves, to learn about themselves, what their culture is. Many teachers that come from outside of Alaska often say, and Emily's heard this, I don't have a culture. I don't know what my culture is. So it's both things. It's about connecting to these new cultures and new communities, but also understanding themselves more. So they come in from the outside, they go to a culture camp, they meet with elders and with youth, and they spend time in the community before they start teaching. They are sometimes, in some cases, assigned a mentor within the community. They have lots of opportunities to really get grounded in that community. And what we found is, through that work, teachers are staying longer, teachers are more connected to their community, and their teachers are better able to teach the students that are there. And they're learning from the community how that community wants their students to be taught. And they're there as learners, and they're there as community members and not as outsiders. So that's one of the programs that we've been doing for quite a long time, and we do that program in the north part of Alaska. We do it on the western coast, and also now in Bristol Bay. Wow. So that's one program that we love, and the partnership with the Bristol Bay Foundation has been great.
What Kameron was talking about in terms of, a lot of teachers and a lot of people, Americans, who say, I don't have a culture. It's the funny thing about moving to a place like rural Alaska is that most people don't feel that level of discomfort or outsiderness until they do something where they are put in a position where they're like, oh, I'm the only type of person who is here. And I think teachers feel that. And a part of the retention challenges, I think, is because teachers sequester themselves within that school environment, because that school Western environment is the closest thing that they have to feeling comfortable. And that disconnect from the community, it's like a negative feedback loop, right? And that's exactly what C3 is trying to combat. It's through trying to build relationships with community members and their students in a way that is also providing connection for them. Like, why would you want to stay in a community if you feel like this level of outsiderness?
Exactly. And one of the things, in particularly in the Bristol Bay Foundation, that we've done that is so important is, again, I said it started out as a program to sort of combat teacher turnover, but I think one of the things that it's evolved to is communities taking ownership over who comes into their community, how they come into their community, what new people need to know to be successful, and a different way of building relationships with them so that they are good members of the community and good teachers in their community. And so part of it is that real ownership. And it used to be that was the school's job. The school did an orientation, the teacher showed up, and they often didn't even leave the school or the school housing, because they just went from their housing to school and back and forth. But this really embeds them in the community in a different way and gives community the responsibility and the ownership on ensuring that they come in the right way.
From the foundation's perspective, a little bit of historical background. I mean, the C3 program is one of, again, has decades of experience and background, and it's so funny that the TLC feels so old and both so new. So old in that you can't talk about what it is today without giving a nod and acknowledgement to the decades of work that other educators within the school district, and I can jump in and talk a little bit about partners. So we lovingly refer to the TLC as the octopus because there are 8 different partners. And that is incredibly rare for an ANEP or Alaska Native Education Programs grant to have that many partners. But I think it speaks to those strong relationship. It's the Bristol Bay Foundation, it's BBNC, it's the Alaska Humanities Forum, it's all 4 of the Bristol Bay Region School District and the Bristol Bay Regional Career and Technical Education Consortium, so the CTE program there. And our role, and my role has evolved depending on the grant needs, but in my role as the TLC program manager, half of it was building relationships and sharing resources and information with partners. And that was like our connection with C3. It's showing up to mid-year gatherings, it's saying hi to people and making connections. And then the other half, or 80%, is culture camp. And that really has taken on a life of its own. In the original grant narrative, I think there was only 6 to 8, and we had 5 camps alone this past season. So it's been busy, it's been wonderful. In the words of Alex Santa, we had a lot of camp in the region. and it wasn't just us. And I think that is a part of the intention with the TLC program too, is that we're inspiring other organizations to take on the work, and helping communities figure out how to do it. Like, culture camp is a huge lift, and it's not just throwing a bunch of people together. One of the things that I learned about the forum is that great programming happens with very intentional design, and I brought that over into thinking about how to structure culture camp with our team, and that's one of the reasons I think it's so successful.
Yeah, and just, I mean, we just hear from communities all over Alaska that they want to do culture camps. That culture camps are such a wonderful way for the community to create spaces within their own place for their young people, for their elders, to celebrate, to teach, to really immerse themselves in their own culture, their own language, and their own history, and really create those important spaces for that. And one of the difficult and maybe wonderful things about this is those are often done not with people from the outside. Right, those are done with people who are from there and live there, and so this is an interesting challenge to try to bring new people to those spaces and to do that in a respectful and authentic way. And so that's been all across Alaska. That's been one challenge is how do you allow communities or ensure communities are doing it the way they want to do it and teaching what they think is most important, but also asking them to create space for new people to come in and learn with them and alongside them. And generally, it's been really successful. It's been an opportunity to try to do both, to have these great, and in different communities, it's very different. In some, it's really around language, and other communities, it's around wellness. And so it can be, the focus of what happens at those camps and in the program can be very, very, very different. But within that cultural camp, you also have that cross-cultural learning going on as well. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of stories around that are pretty interesting. So.
What's funny is we've been doing this podcast for about a year now, and I don't think there has been one episode where we haven't talked about culture camps, because it's that important. Like, people are really just craving culture in their communities. Anise and I will talk sometimes about, man, they have culture camps for young kids, they have culture camps for young adults, but what about us? Like, I'm 31 now, and I'm like, I'm not too old to learn, especially for people that haven't grown up in maybe the rural communities, or maybe, I didn't shoot a moose when I was 10 years old. Like, it's so cool to be able to learn that as you get older too.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the wonderful things about this particular model of culture camp through the foundation, because it's a little bit different from BBNC's in that we've coined it a floating culture camp. And so instead of flying shareholders from point A to point B and doing overnights, we really are hosting in the community. Mm-hmm. And so, we've had people call us and be like, hey, can you fly me and my kid over to culture camp? And we're like, we're actually hosting it for this particular place and these folks, but you're more than welcome to come over and join us. And people have done that, where they've boated up the river because they wanted to join camp so badly. But that floating culture camp model lets adults come and lets elders come and lets have their children that really deep, like, multi-generational aspect, which is a lot of fun. Yeah. It's also fun to send kids home at the end of the day with love. I bet.
Yeah, and then for them to spread their knowledge that they learned is like the coolest thing.
Yeah.
Well, and the different perspectives, right? So we often get to be with these new teachers that have never been to Alaska, maybe even are new in the teaching profession, and are coming to small rural communities and stepping into a whole new world and seeing really interesting contradictions and really great questions about why things are the way they are, right? And it's a great conversation to have, right? Why are Inupiaq people eating pilot bread and drinking red Kool-Aid? Like, what? How does that have to? They're like
both foundational things to be
exactly. Like, what's happening there, and why? How did that come to be, right? Mm-hmm. And why is language where it is? Why in some communities is it so rich and so many people are fluent in their language, and other communities they're not? Well, why is that? And then we have these conversations about colonization and about history and about all of the sort of painful things that have led us to where we are, and so. So these both joyful and celebratory conversations happen, and then the really difficult questions happen about how we got to be where we are, and it's so important for new people coming into these communities to have those conversations and to learn that history and those stories, because they are going to be working with children every day, and they have to understand the context of how we got to where we are and why we are where we are. And so it's so valuable, because in the past they didn't have that. They were just thrown into these jobs and expected to be successful. So
is the teaching learning collaborative and the culture camps simultaneous, or are they separate?
All part of the same program. So at different points in the year, different things are happening. I would undoubtedly say that summer is our busiest time of the year, but the work does not stop just because the summer months are over. And so while C3 is having mid-year gatherings, we're talking to tribes and planning the next one, and also checking in with the CTE folks, and then the UAA Masters of Education students are coming in, and their experiential learning coordinator Miles wants us to come hang out and share food and stories, and so there's a lot happening at all times of the year, at all points. So it's not just culture camp.
We kind of already touched on this, but we know that storytelling is a huge part of Alaska Native cultures. Kameron, in particular,
Do you want to add anything about how the Humanities Forum embodies this?
Yeah, I mean, I talked a little bit about stories and how what an important part of our work they are, and I think about it's great that I'm here with Emily, because I think about the project that she was involved with for so long, Alaska Humanities. I think I heard translates being together, but I actually talked with Andrew Guy over at Chalista, and he's like, I'm not sure that's how I would exactly translate it. He was like, I think it's more like being part of family. That was a better translation for him. So I thought that was really, really interesting. But the program, and we can share more about it, but the origins of that program, though, go back to a time that many of us remember, and that was the paintball incident in Anchorage. And if you don't remember that story, it was pretty horrific. There was a group of white teenagers driving around in their car in Anchorage, and they were recording it, and they were shooting Native people with a paint gun. It was on the news, and it was terrible, and it really highlighted this very huge division between Native and non-Native people, between potentially urban and rural folks. And so out of that came an idea to create what was at that time the Urban-Rural Cultural Exchange, which was an exchange between urban and rural students. And that went on for years, and where urban and rural students went and lived for periods of time in their different communities and learned about culture and learned about difference. And then years forward, that evolved into this program that Emily and I were both involved in, called Ilakucharak, and it was really about bringing students together. And this one was all Native students, but it was about bringing students together from all across Alaska and creating cohorts of Native students that were from rural and urban environments, from the north, from the west, and they would spend time together and travel together to different communities. And they would learn about each other. They'd learn about their cultures, they'd learn about their languages, they'd learn about their traditions, and they would build connections. And they spent a year together?
It was a full year for our cohort students.
Anyway, I want Emily to talk about it more, but another great example of culture being at the center of creating programming for young people that was just so powerful and so important. And we know that that's often the thing that helps them after high school. Go into a job, go into post-secondary, that connection with who they are and where they come from is such a powerful way for them to be resilient and for them to walk through life.
Yeah, it was really wonderful. So just like Cameron said, one of the reasons that it was one of my favorite programs was because I had never seen a youth program up until that point that was doing that cross-regional exchange, where a kid from the Southeast could come to Bristol Bay, which we did. They hosted an immersion in Dillingham. And it was always so fun to hear the conversations between those students, because we'd be sitting in a college campus at UAA, and a kid from Teller would be sharing about what they do in the summertime, which was four-wheeling, it was bonfires, it was fishing, it was all of these things. And then a student from Anchorage would talk about going to the mall, they would talk about maybe going to Heritage Center. And one of the other things, like if either of them had gotten a chance to visit urban or rural prior, which not all of them had, they would say, but what do you do? It's so boring in Anchorage. Or like, well, what do you do? It was so boring in Bethel, or like X, Y, and Z. And so to hear that like exchange, and that was one of the lighter moments, but then they would really dive in to talk about who they were and their grandparents and all of these things. And but that sort of like light, easy connection from youth, to have fun together, and then to also share like these very deep formative experiences was just incredibly special. And I think a lot of people, let alone young people, don't get a chance to do in their daily lives. Like there was so much reflection, conversation, storytelling, all the things, right? But one component that I think is so important, and as it relates to Culture Camp, was this experiential learning piece. And so just the ability for a student from, Point Hope to get on a plane by themselves and to experience that for the first time, huge. And trying to reduce the number of student dropout, just getting on a plane, like that as being a super special experience. It's a cool program.
Yeah, and one of the stories that I remember is hearing about a young person, actually from the region that I grew up in up the North Slope, but sharing a story about whaling, and the other student was from a more urban environment, and I think at first the person that was sharing the story, the young man that was sharing it, was really nervous because they thought the other person would think it was kind of weird. Because it was so different from where they were from. But as the story goes, they really connected over it, because it was really not as much about whaling, but it was about family, and it was about community, and it was about the things that they really held to be really important in their lives. It was a really cool experience to watch young people who seemingly could be so different but find such strong connections. And that's, I think, the power of storytelling. It's you can tell a story that seems so different from someone else, but because of that story, we can find so much connection.
I mean, and I think that flavor of just being comfortable in your own skin is something that so much of the cultural programming and the educational programming are trying to accomplish. And it's interesting being from the foundation perspective, because programmatically, there feels like there's a very hard line between scholarship and educational programming and cultural and heritage programming. And that the part of the work that we're trying to do is actually break down those lines and say, no, learning doesn't stop when you leave the school. It has many different faces. You learn from your grandparents, you learn at home, you learn outside, you learn in school and in the classroom. And I think that's a part of why we host Culture Camp, or try to, in schools. And it's to show that this cultural learning, and to normalize it, so that feeling of wanting to share about hunting a whale or doing beaver tanning or whatever it might be, kids and adults and elders stop feeling that sense of otherness. And that really is a huge protective factor in marking success in any way, whether it's wanting to go to college, whether it's wanting to be a commercial fisherman, whether it's wanting to be a good family member. And I was really like that piece of adult and elder healing was something that I was thinking about a lot, because at one of our culture camps, I mean, we had a teacher who had been in the school system for over a decade, probably 15 to 18 years of experience in community. And we had this moment in the STEAM where she had said, I have never seen the school open to the community in my entire years of service in the way that it was this year.
Yeah.
In 2024.
Wow. Yeah.
And she's like, that's why the kids are so hyper. That's why they're so excited. Thank you for being here. And then, I mean, she was a community member. She was Alaska Native. And sort of on the flip, we have C3. We had C3 teachers there. But they had actually shared with another teacher who was in community about the program. She was not in C3, but she flew specifically to participate in it. And for that entire week, she had said, she'd been in school system about 8 years. She said, this was the most valuable professional development I've ever experienced. I've learned way more about the communities in Southwest Region School District that I have in my years here. And I was like, wow.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So that's really like the essence of the work that we're trying to do.
It makes me think about systems a lot, and I think about the impact of colonization, right? And what it was described to me by an elder once was that the community used to be one whole, right? And that our systems were all one. Our education system, our healthcare system, our governance, everything was one. It was just one community. And what colonization did is it broke it all into pieces. So we see our education system over here and our healthcare system over here, and all these pieces that are not connected. They're completely distinct from each other. And so much of our work is about putting it back together, bringing these pieces back together and making a whole community again. And so it's both inspiring to hear that, oh my gosh, that the community and the school are actually open to each other, and they're communicating with each other, and they're working together. But it's also sad because it's still today really rare, and those systems are still very distant from each other in most communities in Alaska. And so that's part of the work. The work is to try to bring that back together, and that really can only be done if it's led by community. And so that's really where the Bristol Bay Foundation and others are really focusing on how community can bring their community back together.
Are there any other programs that you want to touch on from the Bristol Bay Foundation?
Yeah, absolutely. So jumping into the cultural heritage program space, this past fall, we were awarded to ANP, Alaska Native Education Programs grant, called, artfully acronymed TC2H, or Teaching, Culture, Honoring Heritage, and Bubble, which one of our board members took their hat off and said, I've never seen a BB or Bristol Bay sandwiched in the middle like that. That's excellent. Great job. It's not another BB. But BB stands for Building at Bristol Bay's Language Education. And so, I mean, Culture Camp is a super big part of the work that we're doing. But what I really love about these two particular grants is that they are addressing the sort of systematic challenge that so many educators, superintendents, cultural community workers are wrestling with, which is, how do we get it into the system, and how do we train our teachers to use it? And so those are two of the pretty gigantic grant initiatives that we have, in addition to the enrichment activities like dance, like language classes. These ones in particular are very heavily focused on language, because that's what community members want. But when you have a new teacher who's, fresh from the lower 48 in Ohio, and they're dealing with culture shock and integrating into the community, and then you have community members who are like, how are you going to get a LUTIC into the classroom? Like, that's one other layer of a teacher's experience. Well, they're like, how do I do this? I'm not even like racially like a LUTIC, let alone competent in these areas. And so we heard that loud and clear, and we're like, great, we'll put the LUTIC people to work. We'll create these initiatives, and we'll create the content. And so there is K through 12, pre-K through 12th grade, all three of our languages for Dine'ina, Yupik, and Alutiiq that are being created for teachers to use.
Wow.
And that is also in partnership. This is not work that we're doing alone. So we're working with Lake and Peninsula School District, Bristol Bay Borough School District. IVC, or Iaga Village Council, has been a huge powerhouse in language preservation, and so they're on as well. And really trying to build on and being intentional with the work and being responsive to what communities want. So built in that research and inquiry piece with the NACO Research Institute. So making sure that we are still giving folks in the communities what they're asking for to continue that work. So we're excited. We're nervous. It's going to be a lot of work, but I think it will have some pretty cool positive impacts.
Yeah.
All right, Emily and Cameron, what advice would you give to someone who feels disconnected from their Native identity? It's a big question, I know. And how can they start to engage with their culture?
Wow. I'm not sure they should ask me for advice. But,
a bit of silence.
Yeah. I think that, first of all, I think that the most important thing I would say is that it's really, really important. Knowing who you are, knowing where you come from. We had a teacher who participated in actually the culture camps this last year, who was a white woman who came from Middle America, who was grew up in a blue-collar family, and she became a teacher, and she dreamed of coming to Alaska, and she came to Alaska, and she got a job here, and she's working in Alaska now, right? But had never thought about her culture, had never thought about where she was from. And when she was asked by elders in the community where she was from, she said, I'm from America. And they said, well, I know you're from America, but where are your ancestors from? And she said, I don't know. I've never really thought about that. And it was a really, really difficult moment for her, because she saw everyone around her really being able to speak to that and talk about that. And I think it really inspired her to go find that information, that we all come from somewhere. We all have a tribe. We all have our origins, and maybe that's many, many origins, right? Maybe it's all over Europe. Maybe it's all over South America, somewhere. So I think those things are really important, especially for young people to search out and to find where they're from and who their people are. So that's the first thing I would say is look for it, search for it, because it really will ground you in who you are and where you come from. And I think one of the things that is so special about Alaska, I say this to new people, they always ask you when you come to Alaska, where are you from? They're not.
Who's your family?
That's right. That's right. Well, that's the thing is, so they would ask where you're from. So I have someone who comes from Minnesota, and they come to Alaska, and we go into a community somewhere, and someone says, "Where are you from?" And I would say, don't take that question literally. They're not asking you literally where you're from. They're asking you who you are. They're trying to place you in some way, so that, because in Alaska, where you're from really does tell people who you are, who your family is, and where you grew up. And it tells you a lot about who you are. And if you're not from Alaska, then you need to give them more information, right? Well, I'm from Minnesota, and I grew up on a farm, and here's more about my life and how I grew up and who I am, because it gives you the context of who you are. And then, okay, now I can start to get a picture of who you are, right?
Yeah.
And so that as I'm talking to you, I can do that. So that's the other thing is that it's just really important that we figure that out. But specifically, as I mentioned, I grew up in a Nup'ik village, but I didn't learn more about my own heritage until later in life, and I'm so glad that I did. And so I would just really encourage people to put in that work and to learn more about it. And there's lots of resources out there that you can go to. And one of the places that I would really encourage people to go, especially as a young person, is the Alaska Native Heritage Center. It's a wonderful place to go. And there are people there that are really anxious to help you to find your heritage. And so that's one resource that you might consider, especially if you're here in Anchorage.
Yeah.
Wow. What a big question.
Yeah.
I was jumping around like in my brain between like my individual experience and then sort of like the greater experience as a whole. But thinking about myself, I always tell students that I hope that I am a part of the last generation of Native people who was told to put your cultural learning on hold to pursue post-secondary education. I think that there's still a little bit of that exists now, but really when I was younger, it was the best thing for you is going to be leaving community. It's going to be going to school, and unfortunately for a lot of Native people, cost is a barrier. And so I grew up going on a trap line with my dad and commercial fishing and all of those things, but I put all of that on pause as soon as I started entering high school, because I was like, I am too poor to have the flexibility to really just do whatever I wanted to. And I didn't want to join the military. I didn't want to stay in Alaska because that was the narrative. And so I was like, I really got to bust tail if I'm going to create these opportunities for myself. And so I put my cultural learning on hold. Because of all the extracurriculars and trying to do well in school, hunting season took back. I was on the back burner. Fishing was on the back burner. And luckily I was able to go to Dillingham in the summers and spend time with my family there. But really, it wasn't until I moved back to Alaska, which was always the plan, that I felt like I was able to press back into that learning and sort of reset after a huge other cultural shift of trying to get acclimated to the East Coast, which is where I was. And so I'd say to anyone who's struggling with this is that even on the surface, the most connected of us I grew up in region, I'm a shareholder, I'm a tribal member that's federally recognized. Like I have all these little feathers in my cap, and I still struggle with identity for many reasons. I'm mixed Alaska Native, and many of our tribal members are, because that's just the way of the world. We are the best people at having contradictions and holding contradictions in either hand. So one of my favorite modern Yupik philosophers, Warren Jones, says that, we don't actually walk in two worlds. We have a bunch of different colored glasses that we put on, and our perspectives that we put on for each appropriate situation. And for learning, I mean, for any sort of Native person, being curious and being humble, because learning is so hard as an adult, and being able to having to admit that you don't know something about your own culture is also an incredibly emotional experience. So just be ready to work, be ready for it to be hard, but don't give up, don't let in, because as soon as you've got that connection, which you already do if you're Native through this community connection through family, you will always be accepted. Yeah. And regardless of what the rhetoric is saying or the messaging that you're getting. And so just keep at it. I'm a little wonky for a second, but I have to say that one of the things that I'm both hopeful but I also worry about so much is that so much of why we are where we are today is because of our education system, and because the way that we were taught the history of this place was that it all started at contact. And that's what most children are raised to believe, and that the stories of the American experience are the stories that we all share, when the reality is that history started thousands and thousands and thousands of years before that, and that the sort of American experience is really a disruption in a very long arc of history. And what I hope happens is that our education system begins to shift that, and that we start to actually teach the whole story. And I know that's hard, and it's going to take a long time, but there's a lot of effort going on right now. I was just going to look really quick. There's a book that I just started reading, and it's really wonderful. It's called The Rediscovery of America. And it's just really saying, let's tell the whole story, right? And if young people grew up hearing that whole story and saw themselves and their family and their ancestors in that story, how much would that change young people's ability to not only connect with who they are, but to see themselves in this place? So I would encourage us to really put a lot of pressure on our educational system to continue to tell the stories of the history that we've all learned, but let's expand that and tell a larger story. And I think that would change a lot of lives in terms of people being connected to their identity. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and parents and grandparents and other folks, like, this is something that I'm really wrestling with, thinking about the trajectory of my own family. You know, my partner is not Native. He is brown, but he is not Native. And we both have very open conversations around how are we going to talk about culture and identity, because our kids are going to be triracial. They're going to be white, they're going to be Filipino, they're going to be Native. Yep. And so that in and of itself is such, the tone and the way that we talk about race and talk about who we are and our identity in the house is also going to translate over into the school system, and into whatever space that they hold and carry. And so, I think my parents did a really good job, and the best job that they could have at the time. But I'm also, like, as a future parent, like, really wrestling with, how do I set my kids up for success, and how do I make sure that they don't feel this otherness and feel this sense of less than that I think the school system largely contributed to, is making you feel, by not teaching that history, is making you feel like the outsider. And so how do we undo that?
Yep, let's just start talking about it.
Yeah. On the flip side, for those who are non-Native, and myself included, I was raised by an Alaska Native stepmom who has taken me and my sisters in, and I never thought about it for the longest time. Like, I grew up, you talk about not having two worlds, but I kind of grew up in a little bit of two worlds of, like, I got introduced at 11 years old to all my family members and this whole new culture and way of eating food and talking to my elders, and it was very different, and I got, like, plunged into it. But I'm so thankful for all of it. But when I came here, I was so excited because, like, Leah, like, I'm at BBNC, like, I grew up hearing all about it, and we would go to annual meetings, but I had an identity crisis. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, oh no. I will understand from an outside perspective, seeing my family members and talking with them and sympathizing with them, but I will never fully understand. And so for those who are not Alaska Native, how do, spouses, family members, or friends, how do we and they support and engage in Alaska Native conversations and culture and just understanding?
Yeah, when I have these conversations with, my partner and friend, it's so funny because, again, I think cultural things come back to just being normal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my friend's not thinking like, oh, this Native person when they're talking to me,
Yes,
right? They're
yes.
thinking Emily. And so
yes,
I think,
absolutely.
and so I think that's similar with my partner, is that, like, treat each other like people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not fluent in Yupik, but we use a lot of Native words in the household. Like, you could ask Will about badugus, stuks, gavlaks, toes, fingers, eat it, like, sit down, it's time to eat. And I think having a partner or people in your lives who sort of lean into that mm-hmm. and are okay with it just sort of being the norm, because who you are, which is your culture, mm-hmm. just permeates those spaces, right? And so it's acceptance, it's being curious. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite things and most, appreciative things about Will is that he grew up here in Anchorage. And so for him to have this flip experience of mine, really the opposite of like urban versus rural, to really lean into like, okay, we're going to go moose hunting with my dad this fall, and having a really deep excitement about it, I think also helps to just make it feel good, make it fun, make it normal. So like the excitement, the acceptance, the celebration, and just treating each other like people is really helpful. So that's something that I'm thinking a lot about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an interesting time for that question, right? It's an interesting time, I think, where there is a feeling of division and difference in a lot of ways. And I think that the one thing that I would say is that this idea of us, building understanding across culture and across race and across identity, first of all, it's sort of all of our work, right? And I think that's one thing that I think about a lot is often people, if they're not a part of that particular culture or a part of that particular race, they go, oh, well, that's not my role, that's not my. But I think that this work of trying to create better connection and understanding across difference has to be all of our work together. And I think I love what Emily said about being curious, and about being willing to have difficult conversations. And I think the other thing is being able to really think about why we are the way we are and how we came to be. And I think if you go far enough back, you would find that there's often more connection and more similarity than there is a difference. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, I would just really encourage folks, especially, it's odd to have a month for this and a month for that. Yeah. But I do think that it's sort of like the conversation that's happening right now around land acknowledgements, right? And there's a bit of a pushback right now of saying, well, they feel a little rote. They feel a little, it's not about the acknowledgement, it's about the action, and what are we doing? But I do think the thing about land acknowledgements that I really appreciate is it's a moment to be curious, for us all to be curious. And if we start doing that, we're moments where we're starting a meeting or starting a gathering, when everyone, native and non-native people in that room, can go, I wonder who has been here forever, and I wonder what the history of this place is, and I wonder who is still here, and who is, and what's going. Like, these are curiosity moments that we can all, I think, benefit from. And so I think that idea of staying curious and not being feeling intimidated by these conversations about history didn't start, at contact, and being able to be open to those conversations, I think is really important. But I'm hopeful. I think that I've seen more, and just I'm entering the second half of my life at this point, and I'm seeing more people of all backgrounds engaging in these conversations around identity and around culture than ever before. And I'm hopeful that that's becoming more the norm, and that we don't have to have a month to have those conversations, but it's something that's happening all over. And podcasts like this are part of it. So thanks for the opportunity to have this conversation.
Yeah, I feel like the last thing that I have to say, and hearing you talk about this, Cameron, helped, is this like where's the collective responsibility is when you do have these conversations and you are in relationship with one another, be vulnerable, step on toes. The first time an elder corrects you, and this has happened to me, or someone else, like a Native person, whoever corrects you, and you're like, oh my God, I just made the worst mistake. And I think like culturally too, there's this supercharged sense of, you know, I gotta say the right thing, I gotta be the right thing, and it's feeding into this lack of inauthenticity that is maybe connected to the like, oh, you know, land acknowledgements are just rote, you know, it's people giving lip service. But when you think about even just like a sibling or family relationship, you fight. Anyone who has siblings is like, you throw hands, you scream at each other. But at the end of the day, I mean, a big part of that relationship piece is that you are there for one another. And I think that's probably one of the missing ingredients to so many of the lack of connection between groups of people, whether it's politics, whether it's race, like whatever it is the humility to come and say, I was wrong, and I'm sorry that we had this disagreement, or my intention wasn't that, and this is like, let's move forward together. And I think that just that simple act of asking for forgiveness and exploring what that looks like to build relationship is missing. And that's how we continue to be supportive with one another, is just to try to be in relationship and to bring humor into it. Oh my gosh, between all of my friends, like, if you're not teasing me, I don't trust you. if we're not joking together, you are probably not my friend. And so you've got to bring that humor into it. And that also feels like, you know, that anti-humor also feels like a piece of the Native culture too.
Yeah, I mean, just the last thing I would say for non-Native folks and what their role is, and what I think that just being okay with creating space for a story that's not your story for a while, right? And knowing that the dominant story has been the same for so long, and I just think that it's okay to create space for that, and for you to be a part of that, and not feel like you have to step away and step out. But there are millions and millions and millions of untold stories that really need to be told. And so whatever we can do to create space for those stories needs to be done. And so, yeah, you know, this is a great time for that. This is a great time to be thinking about, what are the stories of Alaska? What are the stories of Indigenous people of Alaska that we don't know, that need to be told? And let's make sure that they're shared, and shared widely and celebrated. And that doesn't feel like, oh yeah, well, what about my story? Your story will be told too. Yeah. It's okay. There's lots of time and space for all the stories to be told. You know, don't have to compare them.
You will get a lollipop too.
That's right. But yeah, let's do more of that. Because I think it'll help all of us.
That's really good. Thank you, guys. Well, we're coming to a close. Thank you so much for being here and sharing. I feel like I was just soaking it all up. I feel like you didn't say much.
Little sponges.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's all I can really say is thank you. This has been such a great conversation. For people who want to support the work of the Alaska Humanities Forum or the Bristol Bay Foundation, how can they get involved? How can they contribute?
I mean, the easiest way is donations, right? Like when we were able to make contributions to the unrestricted funds, that gives us a lot more flexibility for scholarships and all the things. But I think another thing too is we've got so much work ahead of us. I was talking to folks in our staff members today, and I was like, I feel like cultural heritage work is similar to the educator crisis and the healthcare crisis, where everyone wants the work, but there's very few people there to do it. So if we come to your community and we make the ask, jump on board. We'll put you to work, whether you're a student, whether you're an adult or an elder. Directly getting your hands involved with what we're doing is something that will be greatly appreciated and a really big help. And then I would also say that our staff is really good at engaging with folks. So if you have questions, or you're like, hey, I want to be involved, I'm not sure how, we'll just write your name down and put you on a list, whether you're an artist, whether you're an educator, native or non-native, whatever it might be, like we'll put you to work.
Yeah, I would say, I would really encourage anybody who's listening to this to go to our website. It's akhf.org, and learn about more of our programs. I think that signing up for Leadership Anchorage is an amazing program if you're in sort of an emerging leader in Anchorage, and actually we're bringing people from outside of Anchorage now. If you're a teacher in one of the schools and want to be involved in the StoryWorks program, it's an incredible program where young people are building and telling their own stories. If you're a community leader that wants to lead conversations that are really important, we have workshops and training programs and toolkits for people to host their own conversations, and we have funding for you to do that. We also have grants for people who want to do community-based storytelling, community-based convening. So look at our website, and there's all kinds of ways for you to get involved and for you to participate in programs of all sorts, really around strengthening community and building understanding. We're like Bristol Bay Foundation. We're a nonprofit organization, and we have to raise money from Alaska. That's kind of how we're built, is that we get funding from the federal government, but we have to match it 100% with Alaska money. And so the only way we do this work is if folks can contribute. And so please do that as well, and please give to the Bristol Bay Foundation as well. I think really two core organizations that are so vital to this state and the communities that we all serve. And so,
Awesome.
give generously for sure.
Yeah. Emily, do you have a website you want to plug?
Sure, bristolbayfoundation.org. Got the best photos. We also have Connect grants too. You were talking about grants, and I was like, there are community grants. Most of them are teachers, which is super cool, but up to $8,000 of free given money without board approval. So if you are looking for ways to get those cultural pieces into your classroom or whatever it might be, or even just independent community members who want to host like fish skin making classes or whatever it might be, that's available on. But yes, bristolbayfoundation.org. Feel free to go through, look at our programs, look at our mission, vision, values, all the things. Doi.
Awesome.
Thank you guys so much. What an inspiring conversation.
Yeah. I just want to say thank you guys again, and thank you to our listeners. We will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
We are one Bristol Bay, no matter the distance. From simple reminders of home to traditions and stories passed down through elders. From the salmon that nurture and sustain us to our Bristol Bay roots that ground us. We are connected through this remarkable place and our native way of life. Bristol Bay Native Corporation, always more than a corporation.